Good evening, and welcome to tonight's webinar on geothermal energy for Greenwich. I'm Janet Stone McWigan. I serve as a select person and co-chair of the Greenwich Sustainability Committee, along with Beth Evans, the Director of Environmental Affairs for the town of Greenwich. The Sustainability Committee is a network of town departments, local nonprofits, and volunteers that works to inform the community about sustainability. We are thrilled to be partnering with the town's Energy Management Advisory Committee on tonight's webinar. If you're interested in learning about a reliable, local, and consistent energy source, you will be interested in hearing tonight's presentations. If that's not interesting to you, you'll still find tonight's discussion engaging because, spoiler alert, geothermal is good for the bottom line. Our topic tonight is especially timely as Greenwich moves ahead on a number of major building projects. The systems we choose will determine our energy costs, budget stability, maintenance needs, and air quality for the next 60 years. Don't take it from me. Let's listen to our panelists. After tonight, if you'd like more information on geothermal energy and other sustainability topics, please subscribe to the Sustainability Committee's excellent newsletter by going to the town's website, www.greenwichct.gov. And with this, I conclude my remarks and hand the mic over to Laura DiBonaventura, a member of the Energy Management Advisory Committee and our moderator this evening.
Thank you, Janet. I'd like to introduce Peter Schweinfurth. Peter is the current chair of the town's Energy Management Advisory Committee. As a private investor turned sustainability practitioner, Peter has experience in net zero building projects, installing megawatts of solar, and in emissions and energy data reporting, including for a local school. Peter is going to give us an overview of energy use and goals in Greenwich, found in EMAC's September 2023 report. Peter.
Thank you, Laura, and good evening, everyone. So, the Energy Management Advisory Committee's responsibilities are to evaluate town buildings' energy usage and efficiency, to develop target energy efficiency standards, to evaluate energy conservation and renewable power generation opportunities, to set reduction goals and the strategies to achieve them, to make energy-related recommendations on capital improvement projects, and importantly, to promote public education to reduce residential and commercial energy consumption. So with respect to that last point, we think of EMAC as a whole town resource, with this evening's webinar as part of our public education series, which included a net zero energy building workshop at the end of 2022, with many of the same panelists as this evening. If you attended that workshop, you may remember that heat pumps, especially ground source heat pump systems, are at the heart of any net zero energy building. In December, EMAC hosted a Power Smart campaign webinar to tout the virtues of battery backup systems for your home, especially in combination with the solar system, and we will have a follow-up webinar sometime next month. Our committee recently published its 2023 annual report, which you can find on the town's website under Special Committees appointed by First Selectman, Energy Management Advisory Committee. In it, you will see that our committee's most important charge is to offer strategies to help the town lower energy spending by 20 to 40%. And with that, a corresponding reduction in energy consumption and emissions. Even as our energy consumption declined 7% last year after 2 cold winters, our energy spending increased by 17% to $8.2 million, driven by the spike in natural gas prices, which were up 57% over the last 2 years. Because roughly half of the electricity produced in New England comes from gas plants, electricity also rose 24% over that same period. So decreasing our energy consumption and shifting away from the use of fossil fuels will provide the town with lower and less volatile energy costs. So I'm grateful to the Sustainability Committee for taking the lead on organizing this evening's workshop on a topic that is especially relevant now in light of the massive incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act, in addition to generous incentives from Eversource that are available to install a ground source heat pump system in your home or in your local middle school or ice rink. In today's session, we'll explore the capabilities and flexibility of ground source heat pump systems, showcasing their tested reliability and widespread adoption in our region. These systems have stood the test of time, providing efficient and consistent heating and cooling solutions and significant cost savings for countless homes and buildings across New England. Maine is actually the heat pump capital of the United States, and heat pumps outsold gas furnaces last year for the second year in a row. As our panelists will discuss, we can all take comfort, pun intended, in knowing that ground source heat pumps have been tried, tested, and trusted by communities throughout our region. With their track record of reliability and performance, we can have confidence in the potential they offer for our energy needs. So now I'll return the stage to Laura DiBonaventura, who was EMAC's first chairperson.
Thank you, Peter. I now have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, Mike Richter. Mike has nearly 20 years of experience in clean energy. He's currently the president of Brightcore Energy. Brightcore is a leading provider of design, financing, installation, and maintenance services for energy efficiency upgrades and clean energy technologies in both commercial, industrial, and even municipal buildings. Mike's colleague, Jonathan Hernandez, will be with us later for the panel. Jonathan is Brightcore's business development head for geothermal and has been responsible for geothermal projects across the globe and has a deep understanding of all aspects of geothermal project development. Please note that a ground source heat pump is the same as a geothermal system. Now, off to you, Mike. Thank you.
Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Great. Can you hear me okay? We're all good?
Yes, we do.
Lovely. Thanks. I'll go quickly through this. I know we have a lot to get to. We'll give a brief overview of what geothermal is, some of the innovations that's happening, and some case studies that'll give you some context for what we're speaking of altogether. Geothermal basics, exactly what Laura said. It's unfortunately termed geothermal, whether it's a heat pump or actually electrical generating steam system. We'll start off with what it's not. If you think about out west, you have some volcanic activity, either hot rocks or actually steam coming out of the ground. Think of the country of Iceland. Deep wells are drilled down. It could be 1, 2, 3 miles down below the Earth's crust. It hits these hot formations. It either uses the existing water or enhanced geothermal. They literally put water down there. There's been a lot discussed on Google's efforts to do this. It's incredibly powerful, but it's very rare because it has to be where the seismic activity is. We're speaking about geo-exchange. It's simply a movement of BTUs from one thing to the other. It's your building to the ground underneath of it. It goes in both directions. The ambient temperature of the Earth is 55 degrees, and we take advantage of that. It's a gigantic battery, very different. This is a closed loop system. We are not generating electrons as you would on the picture on the left. We are simply moving heat or transferring heat from one to another. So how is that done? I think geothermal, I know geothermal's had a bad name from some of the earlier systems. There's open loop wells, which can work quite fine, but often have failed because they get fouled. It's literally hooking into this free stream of moving water below the Earth's surface. The problem is you are exchanging fresh water in from the ground. These systems can get fouled, and they often have failed. A standing column well is a similar literal well that both systems are in. Their heat and cold are actually exchanging with fresh water. On the far right, you see a closed loop system. This is what we're normally speaking about now. The technology has evolved into a closed loop system. And I know we'll get to questions later on, but it's primarily water, sometimes a food grade glycol. So there is no problem with, oh, there was a geothermal accident. There is no fouling of the surrounding environment. This is a closed loop system. Think of a garden hose that comes down. And on the picture on the right has a U-bend. So the only reason that you have two colors here is, for example, on the far right side, it's coming in cold. That ambient temperature of the ground may heat it up to 55. It's coming back at 55, at which point it hits the manifold and goes on to be through the heat pump, heated up to the ambient temperature that you wish in your house or business. There's a couple different types of these heat exchangers, but they all primarily are closed loop systems now for their longevity and the robustness. We can get into some of this later on. The one on the left is a very unique situation. It's deeper, it's more expensive, but far more efficient. And really, as you say, different horses for different courses. We'll get into some of the technology where these things apply. How's this done? First thing you do is you drill a hole, and I emphasize the word hole. This is not a well because we are not interacting with any of the water or any of the table down below. We put a hole in the ground with these different bits. Again, the bits are determined by what is underneath the ground, contrary to, I guess, what you'd expect. Strong stone, unconsolidated material is a problem. The stone itself is excellent when you have bedrock like you do here in Connecticut or Manhattan. It's ideal. The closer it is to the surface, the cheaper the well is to drill. But if you see these four examples on the left, there are different types of drilling, but they all require a very large machine with a lot of pressure on the top, some more than others, but they're going to have various drill bits that are made out of everything from diamond to God knows what else, a crystal, polycrystalline kind of grouter. But it's that percussion that you have that gets to the round. So they're very loud and a bit messy. We're going to talk about a different type of drill bit that allows you to get into some smaller places later on, but it's a fairly simple process. You want to get to that stone as quick as you can. Why? Because the thermal conductivity of the actual stone in the ground is what we're after, and that can transfer the heat effectively. What's interesting about this is a singular system that works in two different directions. If you see this little vision on the left of the house or the school, it's summertime. So you have hot air coming in. Again, the ambient temperature, if it's 95 out there, that's what you're pulling in. It goes through the heat exchanger down through the ground, comes back at 55 degrees. That's cooling mode. You're rejecting the heat into the ground. It's a giant sink. The inverse happens in the winter. You see the snow out there. You could literally be taking this cool air, or this cool temperature might be 0 degrees out there Fahrenheit. What is it underground? Again, 55 degrees. It's fairly simple. If you can take that, the mechanical lift from 55 degrees to what you want in your house or school is 70. 15-degree lift. That just means you're very efficient. You're using less energy. Here's a different example of it, but it's the same thing. This heat pump goes in two different directions. One, it's cooling like you would a fridge. And if you notice with your refrigerator at home, you're blowing out that waste heat. We're putting it in the ground. I think I may have skipped a slide there. Yeah, sorry, I didn't. One thing that's very, very interesting. This is a manifold. I won't get into it. I'm not an engineer, but we stop at the manifold. And you'll see in this next picture, we have to integrate ourselves in with the existing engineer that's working on the school or the building or your home. These things are in series, so if something catastrophic were to happen in one area, you can shut it down, you can replace it. It does not shut down the entire building. So I want to emphasize how much robustness there is to the system. This is what I was looking for. There's basically two systems into one. You have below grade, the ground connection down below, the ground heat exchanger, and above is the mechanical system that you will often have in a typical commercial industrial building. I mentioned air source heat pumps is normally what you'd be putting in there. They're effective, they're fantastic. It's electrically based, but they're not as efficient as ground source. Because why? You're taking the ambient temperature of the air through a heat pump and then getting it to 70 degrees. It could be 10 below zero out there. That's an 80-degree lift. So with the ground source, you have that kind of common battery of 55 degrees. That's not going away, and it's particularly efficient. So let's So I just gave you kind of the drilling, how this thing works. That's what we're talking about. Some of the hurdles that we've had out there are being addressed now through the innovation. We are looking at different drilling rigs, techniques, even drill bits, and certainly financing that we'll get into in a moment. I just want to make sure I'm doing okay for time. Yep, I'm okay. So you saw the 4 drill bits that require an awful lot of pressure on top. This blue one on the right is what we've really been fortunate to be able to bring across the Atlantic. Europe's about 2 to 3 decades ahead of us in their technology. They have higher energy costs, more densely populated. These are proven technologies that we've been able to partner. It comes from the mining industry, where these drill bits had to be a lot more exacting on where they go to hit very hard to get to veins of minerals that they're looking for. And we have a partnership there that can transfer this technology. It's been used in geothermal for many, many years, so we know how it works. Why does that matter? There's a closer look at it. Why does that matter? These guys are in the downstairs of a building, actually quite the same town as Henrik Lundqvist is from Lunda. It's in a mall. They are drilling with a water hammer. The water is scooting up there, but it's all collected, filtered, and then put back into either the ground or a wastewater system. It's drinkable. We're doing this up at Bard College, and we filtered it down to, millions of microns that can go right into the stream. You're able to get a high percussion drill bit into areas you couldn't before. It does not require the enormous rigs. And here's an example up in a major university in Connecticut, where they were asking for geothermal. And if you look at the utilities in the ground, this is, 200-year-old, 300-year-old city. There's a lot there, from everything from Verizon and gas lines to water. We had a very narrow area to do it, and you can't do it with conventional. This is what we came up with. I just want to give you a quick view of this because it's changed the applicability of this fantastic technology called ground source heat pumps. This is a bird's eye view on the left. And what you have is the big circles are the terminus of the well. In the middle is actually a bike path, and a normal bore field is 20 feet at center. These things are 5.5 feet at center. With a smaller rig and a more accurate drilling, we're able to get within those utility confines and drill a bore field that accesses the thermal mass of a football field 600 feet below, but perforations on the surface are about 5.5 feet apart. So we got this little mini rig, which is more like a John Deere tractor that you'd have in your backyard, as opposed to a fire engine. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. On the right-hand side is this group of 6 side view. This is a series of bores going down on an angle. Again, you're hitting this big thermal mass down below, tiny perforations in the surface. It just means you can apply this technology in areas you otherwise couldn't. On the left, you see a different schematic of the same concept. Normally, that bore field would be a gigantic grid, and it could be the size of a baseball field, a football field. If you see that lower left-hand little vision there, it's very small on the surface, and this allows kind of game-changing accessibility to this technology. And there's been 2 things that have held up the uptake of this technology in North America. Quick question would be, well, if it's so good, why isn't it out there? We have about 1% penetration in the market in North America, and it's changing quickly. But there's 2 reasons that held it back. One was the pricing, and we'll get to that in a moment. The other one is just the applicability. We just didn't have the ability to bring a fire engine size vehicle on retrofit market and often urban settings. So it just didn't happen. In Europe, it's closer to 25%, at least in Scandinavia, where we're getting a lot of our technology. Here's why. We have fleet diversity in our particular company. This truck mounted rig is the normal ones. We do test wells. We do it when you have enormous open land. We're doing a number of universities with exactly this rig. The one in the middle is a little bit of a hybrid. It's extraordinarily capable. You notice it has track mounted, so it can get to areas others can't. It can drill on an angle. You can plop this thing on a hill. It doesn't slide off. The capabilities of this one, it is about as cutting edge as it possibly can get. The mini rig on the right is something that is really exciting to us because this helps in conventional drilling and retrofit markets. We are able to get more access, more therms, more thermal mass, because this little bugger can get into places others can't. Here's, I think, a picture that's a bit lacking on the right. This is about the size of a medium fire truck, and it should have a picture of a man there. But if you can imagine a normal human, maybe 6 feet, would come to the right-hand side, the red truck's rear view mirror. On the left, this thing needs about 9.5 feet of clearance, not the traditional 35 feet that the big rigs need. What does that mean? We can get into places we otherwise couldn't. So it's extraordinarily effective and efficient. So we talked a little bit about the hardware that's changed. These things are coming over here. We've invested in them heavily. A lot of other companies have. So the capabilities and the applicability of this technology, which is the most efficient way to heat and cool a building out there, now can be, the market has just opened up for it technologically. We talked about the hardware. The software allows us to be extraordinarily accurate where that little drill can go. If we start moving off property, which is a big deal downtown, you can set it and reset it, I should say. This screen that you're seeing is capable of our engineers at our control center and on site. So they can say, well, why is it taking so long for this hole? Let's try a different drill bit. All kinds of feedback in real time that just otherwise was all feel at the hands of the master driller. So it's not just hardware, these rigs and drill bits, it's the software that's behind it. We have an extraordinarily capable group coming out of our Office of Excellence in Stockholm, and this same kind of often AI generated algorithms allow us to do things that we were just incapable of, certainly in North America in the last couple of decades. How capable is it? We're able to actually, in 15-minute intervals, understand what the weather's going to be. Say tomorrow afternoon, a polar vortex is coming in. It's going to drop from 46 degrees down to 10 degrees. We can preheat specific boreholes. So imagine these boreholes go down 500, 600, maybe up to 800 feet. We can preheat these things with the waste heat, understanding that tomorrow when that temperature drops by 30 degrees, we will reclaim that heat. It's waste heat, again, used, their therms you're already paid for. And they call this thing the thermos because you do it in the middle and it starts to radiate outward. It's extraordinarily advanced and extraordinarily accurate. And you can only do that when you have the hardware and software to match. But that's where the industry is going now. It's a very different place than we once were. This is the Smeldon multifamily building. This is, I believe it's in Stockholm, but you can see this is an existing building. Just to give you a sense of the capabilities of what's out there, this is that same mini rig, same brand that we have, same type that we have. You're able to get this through here, take it apart. At its smallest point, it's about 4,000 pounds. You're able to go into a basement. These guys have a little control shift. The man in the middle picture on the right, wearing the yellow, has a joystick, and he is letting this thing go down about 500 feet. You tie off the manifold. Again, that's where our expertise ends, and we hand it off to mechanical engineers, but we work hand in glove with these guys on the design assist. Then you have really you cement over that, and it's a usable basement. You are not accessing these things any longer. You don't have to. If one fails, again, you turn it off at the manifold. This is that's the front of the shopping center that you saw the pictures of it before. A schematic of how accurate these things are. The perforations again at the top, very small, down the bottom, accessing huge thermal mass. All to be said, again, some manifolds. They're actually quite beautiful when they put these things together and quite functional once you're done. I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to pretend to know all of this, but what you need to understand from this, the outdoor temperature.
I'd be happy to explain it, Mike.
Well, you know what, John, I'll just rip through this because we're a little bit thin on time, but, and John can, of course, correct me in the Q&A where he's on the panel, but the air temperature, seeing the blue, goes up. It varies. But if you see the temperature from the borehole thermal storage is very consistent across time. So that 55-degree ambient temperature does not vary. It does not vary when the air temperature goes up and down across seasons or across the day. So it's extraordinarily important. The coefficient of performance does not vary particularly. You see some of the squiggles, that's how the building is being used, but you have a very robust system here that can handle pretty much any load. Here's an example of that same building. They had about 80% of its energy use if you see there on the left where right under the 125 megawatt hours, comes from geothermal. These are systems that we can design to be all of your building load or a good portion of it. So it's not just a fringe, interesting technology that we're throwing there to label yourself green. These things work and they last. This is One Java Street, a deal that we're just finished. It's new build, new construction, 750,000 square foot. 96. Maybe I was underestimating it. Multi-use in Brooklyn. It's the largest one in New York State. 321 boreholes during the construction process. A couple of them were run over. That mini rig was able to come in and course correct as they're building the foundation around it. Again, a use for this. We're about 500 feet down. We can drill. I mean, this was a brownfield with tidal issues coming up from the river, right on the waterfront. It's a spectacular project, and on new builds, it was fairly straightforward. This was conventional drilling. This is where we currently are at Bard College. That is conventional drilling, a little bit of a different financial structure. Bard had already had, before we arrived in the scene, experience with the geothermal. So the conversations were very quick. The worries and the perceived risk they had already gotten through. They had to kick the tires to know whether we knew what we were doing. And we were able to set this thing up in order to retrofit their library. Right now, it'll be 50 boreholes. I was just up at the site last week. It's actually beautiful. It's going along swimmingly. This is the Beresford. This is where we use our mini rig, and it's an exceptionally beautiful 100-year-old co-op on Central Park West on 81st. Many of you probably know where that is. This is not low rent district, and these people were committed to doing it. We diminished their greenhouse gases by 41%, as you can see there, and truly their energy use by about the same as you'd expect. This is a really interesting system that has thermal energy storage, a hybridized system with air source, just to maximize the shoulder seasons. And of course, the geothermal. What was incredible about it was we were able to take that little buggy apart. On the picture on the right, that is underneath that building on Central Park West and 81st. Again, this is not a brag. This is what technology has wrought. We can do this in the retrofit market. We understand how to do it. That was once the coal room of that building. It was converted to the oil room and is presently the geothermal room. This thing is up and running. We've just commissioned it and super proud of it. John can talk to this, but we're not going to have John speak to this right quite yet. You're looking at this borehole thermal energy storage where we can go down with that small perforation in the basement of the building. And if you can imagine this thing going underneath into Manhattan schist, missing the subways, missing the water lines, missing the utilities, we have that capability, and being able to be extraordinarily accurate about where we drill, how far out it goes. It's still in the building's footprint. You can't be on your neighbors and stealing their therms, so to speak. So this is just to speak to the accuracy and the capability. But even this, if you see under the results summary, this is a 24% greater than an air source heat pump. So it's pretty significant. I don't think you need this. This is the shape of things to come, these thermal utility networks. As you think about this for the town of Greenwich, every building that you do, we're looking at the library in White Plains right now and a couple other major cities in the tri-state area. Every building that you do potentially can be hooked into a thermal energy network. You hear these things, UTENS, Utility Thermal Energy Network. The utility on the front is utilities are interested in this. They're extraordinarily helpful. They understand that this technology works and it's extremely robust and long lasting. Underneath the ground, that area is, we have what do you call it? It's expected, life expectancy is 75 to 100 years. So, I mean, a big question is, well, what happens if there's a perforation in this? Well, we can put another hole there, but for the most part, seismologically, they're impervious to fire, to flooding. These are very robust systems and they help with your resiliency and your longevity, but mostly they help with your operational costs. Just a chart that I think is relevant. We can do 500 feet as we did in the Beresford. We can go 800 feet. Why? You get more linear feet of heat exchange, or we can do that RIGAN, which was earlier in the program where I showed you a series of pictures that are more expensive upfront, but far more efficient. So you can yield an incredible amount of BTU changes in a small area. I got about a minute left. I told you there's two hurdles. The first hurdle was the applicability of this great technology. And the industry has really kind of addressed that in the new technology that's coming from Europe. The second one is the IRA. This is extraordinarily important. We start with about 40% diminishment in the CapEx, the upfront cost. What's important to understand is it doesn't only hit below ground. It hits all of the bore fields, but it hits the mechanicals on the inside of the building. Why is that important? Because the mechanicals on the inside of the building, there's a slide missing that would show this, are not subject to the IRA. So we are finding that the upfront cost has been diminished so great that it's actually the same, often less in the case of CapEx. And this is nothing to do with local law 97 and some of the fines that come. This is just simply the federal level. They're stackable with state and local utility. So geothermal upfront is on par for the most part with what you're looking at otherwise. Where it shines is operationally, and you can save enormous money on that going forward. And when you're thinking about something like a school or library, municipal building, your hold period is kind of forever, and that becomes very, very important. So I will say goodbye there and look forward to your questions.
Mike, thank you so much. I know I learned a tremendous amount about this tested technology that lasts 75 to 100 years and benefits from the kind of bedrock foundation that we find here in Greenwich. So now we're going to turn to talk with Chris Till and Jess Farber about applying this technology in their community. Jess Farber is a mechanical engineer and vice president with a nationally recognized engineering consultancy, CMTA. Jess has 30 years of engineering and design experience, including on geothermal, net zero, and other data-driven high-performance projects. Chris is both a civil engineer and an environmental and water resource engineer. He leads the planning and execution of building construction, renovation, operations, and maintenance as the facilities manager for the town of Manchester, Connecticut, a town roughly the same size as Greenwich, located outside of Hartford. Christopher has completed and maintains 3 net zero energy schools among his other projects. Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Laura. Wow, Mike, that was one heck of a presentation that you gave, and tough to follow. But I'm here to talk about the owner side and our experience in Manchester. When we started talking about geothermal, the first thing that came to mind for town staff and the building committee was, trying to turn something like a Ford Pinto into a Tesla. Based on our past school renovation experiences, for buildings that were built, just after World War II, the idea of transforming these buildings into state-of-the-art net zero buildings seemed like a daunting task. We had performed a phase 1 of the school renovations, and the EUI, the energy utilization index for the prior projects was more than double than the targets for net zero. So we thought it was going to be a real long shot to get to net zero. So our first glimpse of optimism came during the interview process for our design team, when we listened to firms, particularly CMTA, who we ended up hiring along with their architect partner, TSKP Studio, who showed us how they had successfully done net zero energy projects all over the country, and that it in fact was achievable. So next slide. The first thing we did is we had the planning and study phase, and that started with the Manchester's Sustainability Committee advocating for reduction in carbon footprint, and establishing that net zero energy goal for the final 3 elementary school renovations. Our Board of Education, as part of their education specification, they demanded that we provide 21st century learning and teaching environment for the students and the teachers. And the Sustainability Committee, they really lobbied our town council, which is called our Board of Directors, just prior to the authorization to go to referendum, to switch from, what had been the latest technology with fully condensing boilers to go to fully electrification of the building and using renewable energy with a net zero energy goal. An additional 5% of the total $81 million budget was added for this net zero goal. So we had about $4 million extra to help us pursue that net zero energy goal. Next thing we had to do once the referendum passed was we had to go out for an RFP to select our design team, as I had mentioned, as well as our commissioning agent. And one of the top priorities was to identify firms that had experience in net zero energy design and construction. And we had to look beyond just our local firms, being that the adoption of net zero energy and geothermal is relatively new. It was when TSKP Studio, our architect, brought in CMTA, a national firm. Like I said, they had done many net zero energy buildings of all different types, including schools. And we really began to believe that this was possible. So we started off thinking it was really a lofty goal. It would be a nice to have, if we could do it, to actually believing that that it was it'd be possible. So next are our renovation goals. Like I said, the school district wanted to have these schools be comparable to a brand new facility, have a 21st century learning environment. We needed to add program space for things like a STEAM room, for student family support services. Indoor air quality was a high priority, making sure that it's healthy environment for both the teachers and the students, and also to optimize the fresh air that we're bringing into the building so that we're not over-ventilating the space, which leads to excess energy consumption. Natural daylighting, using sensors, controls to provide, once again, the best overall environment for teaching and learning, and also providing energy efficiency with our lighting systems. The building envelope is key to a high performance building. And so, based on the age of our buildings that we're renovating, we had to insulate, we had to provide air vapor barrier, all new windows, doors, and also, make sure that the building was tight to minimize infiltration. So our target for EUI was to get below 25 in order to be able to achieve net zero with the available roof-mounted PV system. One of the other goals that we had was to be able to use the net zero design for our buildings as a teaching tool. We have Energy Dashboard, which is just in the inside the vestibule in the lobby of the schools, that everybody can see that these schools are different, that they're a high performance building. Buckley Elementary School, our first net zero school, which is what we're talking about here tonight, the design team installed a smart flower, which is a heliotropic photovoltaic structure that looks somewhat like a sunflower, and it opens up in the morning and then follows the path of the sun. And once again, it provides a visual, for students and in the whole community to see that this school is in fact different as a fully electric net zero energy building. Our building electrification is achieved by a geothermal heat pump system. We have fully electric kitchen, and we don't have any fossil fuels. So we're very proud to be the first verified net zero energy public school in New England. With that, I'll turn it over to Jess.
Thanks, Chris. Keep in mind, everyone, I've got to fly through some slides here just due to the time, so I'll go quickly. Chris and everybody hit a lot of stuff. This project started before COVID, so keep that in mind when we talk through a lot of this. COVID didn't exist until we got into the design of this thing. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with these older style buildings. I'm sure you've got plenty of them. It's very common to do a total retrofit of these buildings. Single corridor, double loaded corridor classroom, again, 1950s vintage. How do you take this building and turn it into something new was a key driver of the scope. Low floor to floor heights. It was a tough building to do what we were attempting to do, but that's what we like to do. So let's talk a little about the process to get to net zero and those strategies. So there's a lot of components to make this happen. And it is a very holistic design. I can't do it by myself. Chris can't do it by himself. The architects can't do it by themselves. It takes all of us together with this goal to make it happen. So we have to really study the building, understand the building orientation, massing, whether this is new or existing, this same process still applies. We have to study the building envelope. Like Chris said, we got to make sure it's tight more than anything. Insulation is critical, but the infiltration is key. We have to get high performance MEP. And then at that point, we can do on-site renewables. That's actually the easy part. The renewables is the easy part. It's the energy efficiency that's the hard part. And that's where your investment needs to go. So we want to know where energy is consumed in buildings. So as Peter mentioned in the beginning, HVAC is a key driver of that, and geothermal is a great option to do that. That was what we chose to do, but you can't forget all these other systems as well. Chris mentioned electric kitchen. If the kitchen goes unchecked, it becomes the highest energy consumer per square foot in any type of K-12 or school environment. It's pretty obvious with all the appliances and whatnot, but it has to be part of that equation. Building envelope. This building was totally redeveloped from an envelope perspective. It was overclad. The interior was updated, a new roofing insulation. And again, we pressure tested the building to make sure that it was performing. Again, we commissioned MEP. I can't stress how important it is to do commissioning of your building envelope. It is so important to understand how this building is leaking and to get that fixed so that we can make sure we get the buildings to work the way they're supposed to. And again, we have to make decisions. Every job we do has decisions that have to get made, and there's no one size fits all. There's no easy button. It's all about priorities and what's important to a particular owner and users at that point in time. So we run through these processes to help run to ground what makes the most sense for the town. So this was one of 3 projects. Manchester's key driver was, I want the same thing 3 times because we're doing 3 different schools. I want to be able to maintain the same thing 3 times. I want some consistency. So we took that into account as we developed this geothermal HVAC system. So we did what's called a distributed geothermal HVAC system. So as Mike mentioned earlier, we have the ground source wells that are out in the parking lot. There's 60 of them that are 500 feet deep, and those go back into the building into a water loop that go to these individual heat pumps around the building that then do the individual heating and cooling throughout the building. This same unit heats and it cools. You're buying one system to do 2 jobs, which is important when you think about a lot of other systems. You have separate chillers and boilers. There are 2 separate systems you buy. This is one system that does both jobs. And then we have obviously the dedicated outside air systems to provide that ventilation air that we want. And we were able to, during design, improve the design to make sure we could address filtration issues that were emerging through post-pandemic planning. So we have that ability to put filters like that in the heat pumps themselves, as well as in the fresh air systems. And then the renewables, again, that's the easy part. So we scattered the roof full of PV panels. We actually predicted an 18 EUI for this building, and 25 was the goal. And I'll tell you about the operation over here in a minute. And then we modeled the PV to offset that 18 EUI energy use intensity in terms of electric consumption. And here's how it's operating. So I can design these all day long and tell you it'll be zero energy, but until I prove it to you with data, it's pie in the sky. So every month we our engineers collected the data, and we made sure that every month we were getting within the results we expected to get to. So again, we were attempting to get below 25. We were in that 18 to 20 range, and it's performing at a 17. So it's even performing better than we thought. Over time, it should be the same as long as we're maintaining schedules and maintenance and all of that stuff. We should be able to maintain those numbers, but we'll continue to track that over time. It's super important to have that measurement and verification piece to your projects. And what did it cost? So this happened. We designed this as COVID was coming out. This project hit the street in the middle of all of that that was going on. All the COVID protocols were in place. And we were able to bid this project under Chris's budget with PV included for this one project. And maybe it was the luck of the draw of the day, but we've done this for 2 other projects for Chris, and we're still under his total budget outlay for these 3 projects, including that $4 million upcharge that he added to do the zero energy piece. So it can be done, I guess, is the point of that. Every project's unique and different, but it can be done if that's what your goal is and that's what you strive to do. Where do you want to spend your money? Spend it where you want it, and then you can get the results you want to get. Another really cool part, this was mentioned about energy efficiency and the savings. Mike mentioned this. They were spending almost $70,000 a year just to heat the building. There was very limited air conditioning, but that was just for really old gas boilers and just basic heating with maybe some window units. Now this whole building has been totally transformed. It's fully air conditioned, fully mechanically ventilated, and they pay $20,000 a year in utility bills. So that differential, the school building committee in the town puts that back into educating students or whatever they want to do with it. So that gives them a net positive of cash flow that they aren't paying to energy bills. They'd rather place it into education. So that's another kind of side benefit you get out of doing this. Utility incentives were mentioned. Eversource, go through that whole process, gave the town a check for $267,000 to invest. So that's some money that comes back their way to help invest for future projects. Inflation Reduction Act was mentioned. Buckley was prior to Inflation Reduction Act. However, the 3rd project, Keeney, that's in construction right now, will open this fall, should be eligible. We'll be working through a lot of that process, and we're expecting $2 to $2.5 million to come back, again, furthering the bottom line of the investment. All of these decisions were made for Manchester without the benefit of the Inflation Reduction Act, which goes to tell you it's still a smart decision in terms of the economics of the world to do these types of projects. So Inflation Reduction Act is like icing on the cake. It just makes it that much easier to make those decisions. It normalizes the cost of sustainability and makes it cheaper. So take that into account when you're thinking about what you're doing for your projects. And I'm not the only one that says all this kind of stuff. There's all kinds of resources out there that support what we're doing and what we're saying. So feel free to search the internet. There's all kinds of different tools out there of how to approach this. Before and after shots, there's the solar flower in the front that Chris mentioned. Total transformation of this building. It is a remarkable project of what you can do when you set your mind to it. It's a great building. The students love it. There's the energy dashboard. The students can give tours of the school and explain this to the adults, and it's become part of their learning curriculum and their education process. It's been really cool to see them do that. So I think I covered it in time, Julie. So I'll pass it back over to you guys.
Thank you, Jess. Remarkable. What successful projects financially, environmentally, educationally, and to see that it's saving the schools money is wonderful. This brings us to the portion of our agenda where Jess and Chris from Manchester, as well as Mike and John, who spoke earlier, are available now as a panel for questions. I'd ask you to please raise your hand, and I've been tracking. I'll call on you in the order in which I see you raised your hands. And I also have some questions that were submitted that I'll intersperse. So the first hand up was Mr. Sylvester Pecora. Mr. Pecora, would you like to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is all well and good. In 2008, we built a brand new school next door to me, Hamilton Avenue School. And we put 80 geothermal wells in. And they want to go back to the HVAC system, and we on the RTM stopped it. And we want to know what's available. Have you looked into this problem where they they said that the system doesn't work. We spent $1 million. I was on the building committee. We spent $1 million on it, 80 wells, and yet we can't use it now. And
Mr. Pecora, I'm going to jump in here because I don't believe our panelists are familiar with this particular project,
okay,
and say that the town is very much familiar and has tasked the Energy Management Advisory Committee to come up with an assessment of what to do now and what went wrong. So wonderful question. It's very important, and EMAC is going to get back on that particular point. Thank you for your question.
thank you.
The next hand that went up was Hector Arzeno. Hector, your question, please.
Good evening, Mrs. Bonaventura. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And a question, so great to see Mr. Richter here instead of I've been an investor at the Madison Square Garden tickets, and we have great players too in town from your team, and some of my children had the luck to have Dave Maloney as a coach. So, and I know you play with him. But anyway, the question for Mr. Till. Mr. Till, going back to Manchester, thank you very much for coming this evening, and what a great project you have there. Any school reimbursement from the state on the construction and the renovation and conversion to geothermal?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And when the short answer is yes. But I will say Manchester, we're fortunate that we have a reimbursement rate of about 65% from the state of Connecticut. And when we came in with this project to the Office of School Construction Grants, the director at the time, when we presented this, that we wanted to have a net zero building design with geothermal, he was ecstatic. He said, I think that every school project going forward should have a goal of net zero design. So they were 100% behind it. Everything is fully eligible. So they've been a great partner in our projects.
Was the
So-
PV eligible as well, Chris? The PV, the solar renewables?
Including the solar panels, yes.
So you did both solar and geothermal. And
Yes.
again, Manchester reimbursement for construction without geothermal and solar is 65%, more or less, give it or
For
take
all
it.
of our projects, yes, it's 65%
that
reimbursement from the state.
You brought it to 65 because geothermal and solar, or on top of 65% reimbursement?
The 65% reimbursement rate is based on a calculation that the state has as far as, per capita income,
Correct.
based on our population. That's the
Correct.
maximum that we could get. So
Mhm.
we really worked within their formula. There's a maximum allowable square footage per pupil that we worked within. Actually, the whole building program consolidated our elementary school footprint from a total of 10 schools down to 6 schools in order to help maximize the reimbursement. So we're repurposing those other 4 buildings, and so yeah, we do everything we can to maximize those state dollars.
And you maximize to 65 because geothermal and solar.
Geothermal and solar were fully eligible, as were the prior projects that we did during phase 1, where we did not have geothermal. So the geothermal and solar were not penalized, but we didn't get any bonus, so to speak, for our net zero.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you,
you very
Hector.
much.
A question from John Deanna I see is about the availability. Do the incentives really materialize? John, you're up. Or Jack, excuse me. Jack, I think you're muted. Okay, in the interest of time, there.
Yeah, I can hop in. The IRA is very robust. We've done a lot of research on it. It is a tax treatment that is transferable. Our internal counsel, our hired lawyers that look into this because we have a business model that requires it. It looks to say that there's probably a 10-year runway that we expect. This is not an unfunded mandate. We expect it to be no less than 5, but hopefully more. But yeah, we are confident enough to actually do geothermal as a service, where we will take that risk on from the federal incentive. So yeah, in a way, we're putting our money where our mouth is, and it's a really legit question. There's a lot of unfunded mandates out there, or
Laura, that wasn't my question.
Oh.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Excuse me.
Yeah, one thing that I want to say is to correct some things that were said. There's about 1,000 schools in the United States with geothermal. In fact, my first school that I did was in 1990. The problem with some of those schools are they haven't been run correctly. Right now, I've just found out recently, probably about a week ago, that the IRA does cover recovering those same systems, whether you're doing an upgrade. For a lot of those schools that are 25 years old, the internal mechanisms are at the end of life. The IRA will cover that and will cover expanding the system or improving the system or fixing the system. So speaking to somebody just asked about the Hamilton School, we find that the schools being run improperly because the people that are running them weren't the people that were there when we put it in, okay? That's why they're not working properly, not because the systems don't run properly, it's because they aren't being run properly. That can be fixed. I should say that I worked with Brightcore. I'm actually working with CMTA right now on another school that has the same problem as Hamilton. It's lack of knowledge because of improper running. Not that they can't be fixed, and they are being fixed. But there's
Thank you,
money
John.
in the IRA for that. So
Thank you, John. In fact, there was a submitted question I put to the panel. Could you comment on the difficulty or ease of the operations and maintenance specifically of a geothermal system versus a legacy gas system? Thank you.
it's 40%.
Yeah, I can touch on that, and Chris maybe can chime in a little bit as well. I mean, it's, to a lot of people, it does feel like new technology. Heat pumps have been around for forever. Water source heat pumps have been around for a very long time. And so whether, the old approach was we would put in gas boilers and cooling towers to be that heat source, heat sink. And so you could maintain boilers and cooling towers, but the system in the building itself is exactly the same. We're just throwing all that stuff out the window. We put bores in the ground, and that's how we take care of our heat exchange. So from a simplicity perspective, it reduces the complexity because I've eliminated boilers, I've eliminated cooling towers and chemical treatment that go with it. But there is always that question that comes up when it feels like a new system. How do you help me understand that? So we try to spend a lot of time explaining that and educating our clients with how to do that. And so since there's a project we're doing up here in Massachusetts where we were proposing the same thing. So we brought them down there and walked through Buckley Elementary and let them kick the tires on it so they could see it and they go, wow, this really is pretty simple. There's not a whole lot to it. So there are ways to make systems complicated, and maybe there's other people out there doing crazy things that are more complicated. I can't defend or respond to every mechanical engineer out there that how they do things. There are ways to make it complicated, and there are ways to make it simple. I would argue, and Chris could probably support that what's in there is pretty darn simple in terms of what you have to take care of. It's a refrigerator with ductwork on it to make hot and cold air. And
Thank you.
Water through some pipes.
Fantastic. Notice we're a minute from the hour. Panelists, we have 8 questions waiting. I don't know if we can impose on you, and attendees, please feel free. I will keep going, and if you have your hand up, give you a chance to ask. So next up is Javier Alaman. Javier.
Hi guys, great presentation so far. I did have a question with regards to scheduling and impacts of geothermal on, let's say, a construction schedule. Can you speak to that to the degree of how planning in advance of construction would or would not impact schedules? And one of the things I'm looking for specifically here is, can you drill a geothermal well field in advance of superstructure getting constructed above that well field? maybe doing things in conjunction with where the superstructure will go. We would love to hear your experience on that. And, maybe Mike, that's probably a good question for you. And, Jess and Chris, feel free to jump in with some experience that maybe you've had on the projects you've built.
Yeah, I'll touch it quickly, and I'd love to hear what Jess has to say. And Chris, unreal project you guys have. Love listening to it. That's exactly what happened at Java Street. Normally, we're looking at a beautiful opportunity in Hamilton and White Plains right now, and it's an open field, so we can go in there and get in, get out before the schedule. You have to get all the permits and everything else, but there will be no waiting. We cap those things, and they'll just have a manifold, and it hooks into the building. It's all part of the design, so it's actually merchandises particularly well. The Java Street project was interesting because the sequencing was a little bit off. They already had pilings in there, and we had to maneuver around them. And so again, that's where some of that new technology was able to literally get into these labyrinths and be able to plop the holes in amongst the actual foundation of the building. But you go to the other extreme, we can go through the substructure of the floor when the building's already up. But the short answer is it shouldn't. If you properly sequence it, we can get in, get out, cap them, everything's ready to roll, and that's the connection and the commissioning happens. So that's a really key component.
Mike, if I may, also a big part of that is, as was mentioned in the question, is how early is too early. It's never too early. Detailed design documents, basis of design, getting in and knowing what we're connecting into gives us time to also schedule rigs. At Brightcore, we've got our own fleet, so we can bring in 2-3 rigs at a time if time is of the essence. Other times we'd like to be the first on site, and the answer is yes, you can build on top of the HDPEs are the same kind of things that are used in gas infrastructure. High density polyethylene pipes are fused and connected all to those standards. So yeah, you can put them underneath construction and or in retrofits, but for new builds, it can be flexible depending on how much equipment and personnel you have, as well as how accurate and how seasoned those drilling crews can be. A lot of times it's been vertically not integrated. It's been very segmented. So you've got a guy that says, I'll do a few holes. And then of course on the size of the field. So, Java Street was months and months, but it was over 330 boreholes. So
Thank you.
those are my 2 cents. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Right. So in order just to recap, I guess it should not have an impact. So I guess if we're hearing that geothermal well field would add months and months to the construction schedule, that's really not accurate feedback that we're getting as a town, I would say, right? And so if properly planned, geothermal can be done in conjunction with the normal schedule and not impact construction at all.
100%. Yeah, it shouldn't pose a problem. Jess, I don't know, and Chris, if you want to have your experience, but for new builds, it should be seamless.
I don't want to over answer. I think you guys have answered it great.
Wonderful.
Obviously, whoever is suggesting that doesn't want geothermal for your project is what I would say about that. So next question.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. David DeWall.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Fascinating. Question. I'm sort of very interested in the financial aspect of this. You put forward it's a $21 million spend at Buckley. You had $50,000 a year in savings. Obviously, the $21 million, you could build a whole new school for that. Just about. But could you help us segment out the part that you spent on the HVAC and how that looked financially? What's the return on investment? Can you somehow break that out separately to show how that was cost effective?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but basically when we do discuss HVAC system selection, we are looking at initial cost investments, life cycle cost over a 30-year period. The town knew that a total renovation was needed, so a base amount of money needed to be spent regardless of whether they could have gone back with gas boilers and air-cooled chillers if they'd wanted to, right? So there's a certain amount of money, so that delta becomes what we look to offset in terms of return on investment. So when we look at projects, say without the Inflation Reduction Act, and when we did this for Chris, we're probably at a 7 to 8 to 9 year payback, and every project's different. So I hate to generalize, but that's kind of the range we would see. Throw the Inflation Reduction Act on it, and it's that money comes back immediately once the IRS pays you for it. So we don't, depends, and every project is different, but that's what we typically see from our history.
Thank you. Quick question. Is there a resource or two, because I'm really interested in this topic, that you might point me towards to learn more?
The ASHRAE Advanced Energy Design Guide is the best book out there. It tells you exactly how to do this.
Say that again, the advanced.
Go to ASHRAE, www.ashrae.org. Advanced
ASHRAE.
Energy Design Guide for K-12 schools to get to zero energy. You got to type in your email address. It's a free download. And it's a great resource. It gives you all the different ways of doing it, including doing it without geothermal. To be honest, there's other ways to look at it, but there's just other way. It gives you all the tools and tricks you need to know to how to make the recipe of how to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question is Rob Lifflander. Rob.
Mute. Okay. Hi, guys. Thank you very much, everyone. This question, I guess, is from Mike, probably. So I know it's difficult to talk generally about economics of these projects. I'm in the energy industry. There are a lot of different factors, but in my area of the energy industry, there are rules of thumb. Certainly, the IRA has specific incentives. State of Connecticut has specific incentives. So I guess, keeping it simple, wonder if you could talk about, project economics, how they work, maybe use an example, talk about, how you measure, what impacts the cost of these projects.
Laura, can I share my screen for a second, Laura? Just
Yes, you should still have that ability.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be easily done, but I think that should come up. Did that happen to come up?
Yes.
I can't see it on mine, but if you look at this and you just go down the 2 columns, ground source heat pump design on the left column, air source heat pump design, which is normally the competition on the right. This is an actual case study that we looked at, and I'm giving you one that's not a slam dunk, because if you look at the net upfront costs, about 5 up from the bottom, for the upfront costs, 17,590,000 versus 15 million. So it is $2.5 million more, a little over that, for the ground source heat pump, as we said, and that is with the IRA. But look down at the operating costs. You're saving about $600,000 a year, and this was not a slam dunk case. This was one that was just a moderate one. We have had more than a couple that have been lower cost because of the IRA. A really key component is ground source heat loop. Look at the savings on this, because you're calculating both zero from the incentives on the conventional air source, but both the loop and the mechanicals are subject to the IRA, and it materially matters. I mean, that's what a 4-year payback, 5-year payback. That doesn't often happen in much of these things. So I'm going to stop my share.
Mike, can you contrast that with a legacy system with a gas boiler? Just ballpark.
I think I'll let smarter fellows like Jonathan answer
Great.
that one.
Yeah. The thing with commodity energy is the fluctuation in price. So ballpark, one of the things, it's hard to say in terms of legacy, just because the policies have changed. There are decarbonization mandates now that kind of create a stick, and then the Inflation Reduction Act is the carrot. What we've done is to maintain apples to apples is use a levelized cost of electricity at about 20 cents a kilowatt in our modeling. Because if we start going into gas prices or other forms outside of an electrification solution, it basically comes an end of life weighted out type of scenario on our end, because in some cases it is much cheaper for them to operate that, unless there is a policy that dissuades them economically.
Thank you. All right, next
Yeah,
up is Elliot Alchek. Elliot.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. A couple of quick questions. First off, when you mentioned 21 million, was that the cost of the full renovation, or was that the cost of the HVAC?
That was, hang on here, let me just pull this.
That's construction costs.
That's what the
That's
bid.
the full renovation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Minus the owner soft cost. So our total project cost with all the you know, the architecture, the furniture, et cetera.
And what year was that
just under
completed?
30. We opened in September of 22.
22, and how many square feet was that again?
About 65,000, 67,000 or so with the additions.
Okay, thanks for that. So my question is, how did you distribute the heat, and did you add AC?
Yeah, so when you buy a heat pump system, you get both. So when you electrically heat with a heat pump, whether it's air source or water source, that same equipment makes cold air or makes hot air depending on the season. So you get one.
No, I understand that, but how did you? Was that forced air? You didn't do
Yes.
radiant.
Correct. It's forced air. So there's no radiant heating systems. It's a one system we put in the building.
Got it. Okay, and did they because of COVID, did they add like a HEPA filter or any special filtration?
We included provisions. Yes, we included provisions for MERV 13 filters to be put into each of the heat pump units, as well as just the fresh air system. Chris and his team or maintenance team can choose to put those in the future or not put them in. So that flexibility is embedded in the design. Along
Got
with,
it. And did you do
along with
PV
UV
on the
lighting.
roof?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Did you do PV on the roof also?
Yes.
But they did that flower just sort of.
Yes, that's an educational kind of cool thing to do in the front. It's a pretty small, like 6 kW. The whole system's probably 350 kW. So it's a really cool feature, and it actually rotates with the sun. It's a really cool educational element for the students and teachers.
Okay. And last
Thank you,
question.
Elliot.
Oh, sorry. Just last question. Did you look at the cost effectiveness of the PV, just given that, you know, it's just not as sunny in New England? I mean, what was your payback period? Do you know?
You know, I don't have that off the top of my head. I'll tell you that we run solar models to size that in a way so that we know we'll get that output. So in January, when the roof's covered in snow, I don't get the same output. The one reason that zero energy works so well in K-12 is the summertime, I'm way overproducing and I'm not using hardly energy in the building. So I'm net positive significantly in the summertime, and then I take it all back in the wintertime. So the one thing that was interesting about this is the town historically had gone down a PPA route and wouldn't have even bought it themselves. But since this project bid under budget, they said, we might as well, the state's going to help reimburse it. We might as well buy this ourselves. And so they took a different approach for this, and they actually own it and are getting that direct savings. So when you look at the energy bills that they were spending, you know, close to $70,000 a year just to heat the building, again, no cooling, just to heat. Now they're spending about $20,000 a year. That's the net payment. So if they had gone PPA, they'd been spending probably $40,000 or $50,000 a year because they would just got a reduced electric rate. So they get
that includes AC?
Yes, sir.
Mr.
Wow,
Alchek,
that's
we can
impressive.
follow up offline. There's a
Okay.
Greenwich Country Day School locally. Also has a solar system that was a 9 to 11% ROI before the spike in gas prices of the last 2 years. So you're looking at well below 9-year payback. Let's call it 6.
There is a
All right.
USGBC Connecticut tour occurring at Buckley on March, was it 14th, Chris?
Yes.
So sign up and come look at it. We'll be happy to host you.
Great, thank you. Greg Zorthian, excuse me if I mispronounce your name. Your question, please. Moving along. Ernst Schirmer. Please unmute.
Sorry.
Ernst, we can hear you now.
Okay. My question is, this is a very compelling presentation.
We can't hear you now. Come back to the mic, please.
Do you hear me?
There you go.
Okay,
Continue.
it's a very compelling presentation, which I've learned a lot. However, if you go into if you get a top level support system that wants to do this, and yet the local school system maintenance crew is very much stuck in the mud, how do you deal with that? Do you train? Do you take
Great
people-
question, Ernst. Maybe they can outsource it. Let's put that back to Chris to see about operations challenges when the crew is not up to speed on this system.
Yeah, real briefly, there were definitely concerns about learning new technology. We made sure during the turnover that we did training on the heat pumps and the maintenance, and as Jess mentioned, we've standardized. So Buckley was our first school. We opened Bowers last September, which has the same design, and we're working on Keeney Elementary, which opens in August. So we have 3 geothermal net zero energy schools with full PV, and they all have the same system. So yeah, there's a learning curve for sure, but as Jess said, heat pumps have been around for a long time, and it's based on a refrigeration cycle. So it's pretty standard stuff.
Yeah,
Thank you.
follow up on that. Do
Laura,
you
just one quick question.
proactively?
Greg, one moment. Mike, yes?
Just to follow up on that, we offer O&M as well. So we can outsource that if need be, but I think as it becomes more readily adapted, it will not be a huge question going forward.
Thank you. Greg and then Julie. Greg.
Quick question. Do you proactively push that, or do you just assume the school system or whoever else is the client is going to ask for that?
Client is always right. Whatever they want, we try to do. We're in the business of executing. So if they need it, we'll find it.
Excellent. Thank you. Julie, your question, please. We can't hear you, Julie.
Our next project, our next project coming up that has a major energy component is our ice skating rink. Could you comment maybe on some projects that have been done that for ice rinks that employ geothermal systems?
Great call. It's a hard one because these systems normally have to be, and I'll let John pipe up here, but they have to be balanced so that you're using the heat and the cool to a degree. But one of the things that's really, really exciting, I showed you that picture of Barry Farms, which is a thermal loop. All you have are sinks and sources. And so you basically have a data center, an ice hockey rink, you get free heat. You can use that to boil water for the hot water in that same facility or others. So a thermal energy network sounds confusing and difficult. 2 buildings in any kind of communication is a thermal energy network. So what you have right there is free heat for the town of Greenwich. You've already paid for it, and you've paid probably up the nose. So I would highly encourage looking at it and using it. John, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but it is kind of a godsend when you're looking at these thermal loops.
It really is. It's almost too much of a good thing in the sense of these cooling dominant loads. In some cases, we can transfer it to the domestic hot water load, to the DHW, but then there may be still a surplus when you're talking these large ice rinks. What we have seen is doing some studies as an anchor tenant within a campus setting, let's say a university hockey rink, where you have dorms, libraries, laboratories that have more unconventional loads that will require these things, maybe more industrial type processes that can use this and leverage it. You see it in other places, but again, it just requires a lot of modeling and finding the right fit.
Thank you. Next is Louisa Stone. Louisa, your question, please. While Louisa's figuring out how to unmute, I'm going to ask Lynn Garelick. Lynn, what's your question, please? There, I think we hear you. Lynn, is that you?
No.
All righty. Louisa, were you able to tune in and speak? No. Okay. All righty. Last one then, Scott Kalb. Scott.
Hi there. Thank you very much for this presentation. One quick question. I know that when you have closed water loops or liquid loops, when you're circulating liquids, that you can, especially when they're heated, you can develop harmful bacterias and viscosity levels can rise. I don't know if you need to do any filtering of those liquids. We see that often in industrial processes. So how do you control for that? And the other thing I was wondering is, We do hear a lot these days about horizontal geothermal, especially in suburban areas. It's not very applicable in the cities or urban locations, but out in the suburbs where there is a lot of land, maybe under a ball field or something where you can lay loops, 10 feet underground in circular patterns. I don't know whether that's practical or not, but I'd like to hear your opinion.
John, you should probably answer that. I don't have a lot of experience with fouling. Normally it doesn't. Open loop systems do it a bit more, but we test constantly. So that's one of the, preventive maintenance that we do. But John, I'd love you to
Yeah,
take over.
with the closed loop systems and the grout around the HDPE, if it's properly flushed and it's the right and proper mix of glycol, which is food grade glycol, and distilled water, fouling in a closed loop system should not be an issue. We find that more, I come from the geothermal power world, where we would have more direct use of the water itself. And I think that's maybe what you're referring to, maybe more medium enthalpy system, where the water comes in with sulfides, salts, maybe some heavy minerals, carbonates. And then as it releases the heat, then you have it precipitating, whether it's mineralization on the colder, lower enthalpy end. We don't. We actually, it's just water and glycol to use transfer of energy through heat and through conduction, as opposed to convection and more nastier water, for lack of a better term. So perhaps that's what you were referring to, but no. And then with horizontal loops and versus vertical boreholes or angled boreholes, it's a matter of tonnage. It's a matter of how much oomph you're bringing into the system. And so for residential or smaller loads, perhaps horizontal trenches is enough. But what we do is we go on for something that one hole should be able to take care of a house and a half. That's why we're looking at larger schools, campuses, office buildings, multifamily housing.
Impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to give our last question, and thank you, panelists, for staying on with us so long, and attendees, to Julie. Julie, you get to bring it home.
We've heard that the dense bedrock of New England isn't compatible with these systems, and the Northeast isn't the ideal place for geothermal. Could you comment on that, please?
I'd love to take
you're
this
a
question.
geothermal
Okay.
technician. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So my background is geology as well as drilling engineering. And what happens sometimes is the nomenclature geothermal gets caught up with geothermal power versus geothermal space conditioning, which is what we're talking here. Hard geology and hard bedrock, dense bedrock, is actually really good for thermal conductivity, of which density is a factor in that equation. And in terms of drilling, sometimes it's harder to drill alluvium in unconsolidated rock than it is hard bedrock, especially impermeable bedrock, where it's straight as a gun barrel. That kind of stuff is very much in our favor. We use a lot of technology from mining sector, oil and gas, as well as water well drilling, and leverage that nicely. Geologically, it's not fit for making power, like a Hawaii, a California, an Alaska, a Nevada. Perhaps that's where sometimes the wires get crossed, and it's very common, but I think more now than ever, there's both areas are starting to make a very conscious effort to not muddle the waters on either end.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I think what we've always encountered is, and Mike mentioned this earlier, that rock is ideal to drill through. The holes don't collapse. You can drill for days and it's perfectly fine. You don't want to be, it's harder to drill through muddy conditions, sandy conditions, etc. So that's ideal. We're just trying to create a big battery in the ground. We use much mass that we can have to make this thing work. So the more the merrier when it comes to rock or stone or granite or limestone, whatever the case may be.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to remember that, the battery in the ground. That wraps up our time tonight. A hearty thank you to all of our panelists and the speakers, and thank you, attendees, for coming. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Yeah.